Josh here, as Ed mentioned, is actually an expert. He's developed a very deep expertise, I think some of the best I've ever seen, around understanding the strategies and the ways of thinking and the approaches behind how all this was developed. And again, Huawei, as crazy as this will sound, is just a piece of the puzzle. It's just a piece of the puzzle. Josh.
So what Huawei represents is, as Jan mentioned, the tip of the spear of the Chinese Communist Party's agenda for the world, not just the West. And what is that? It is the export of the China model. And the China model is the alternate form of government that they are using to challenge the American model. What is the American model of government? It is the international order, right? The Pax Americana, peace under America. It's the idea that that people are endowed with inalienable rights, certain basic rights which government should uphold and defend. It is the idea that if you violate these rights to a significant degree, you will be sanctioned, you will be punished. And China has created a very different world order where countries that are sanctioned, such as Iran, such as North Korea, continue to trade and continue to operate and continue to abuse their people despite these sanctions. And China allows this and props up this system. China has a system of government. It is a communist, totalitarian system, still very much so, of state-run companies under the guise of capitalism. It is not in any way a changing country. It has a very polished facade, but the human rights abuses, the totalitarian Orwellian state goes beyond anything I think anyone could have ever imagined. They have things such as the social credit system that monitors every single individual, tracks every single connection they have, every single purchase they make, every single friend they have, and it gives them a citizen score. And that citizen score determines your freedom or your oppression in that society. This is a system they are exporting. And when China goes to countries around the world through the One Belt, One Road initiative, Huawei is one of the key companies that builds these infrastructures. So when they go to countries, say, in Africa, they go to countries in Latin America, they go to Europe, they are constructing infrastructure, technological infrastructure, and they are putting in these capabilities within that infrastructure. A country can then have the option of adopting the China model of government. And so, just as an example, several African countries, several Latin American countries are already adopting very similar high-tech totalitarian systems. In fact, Darwin, Australia is implementing part of this as we speak. And this is the alternate, I'd say, future of the world. And this is very much where things could go. Now, if anyone saw the movie last night, a few key terms came up. One was China 2025. One was the 1,000 Talents program. A few other things. They talked, of course, about 5G and the ability to, say, influence different, I think, drones and things like this. What China is doing, they have a saying, surpass you at the turn. In other words, it's very hard. If you want to, so just stepping back a bit, they have a program called Project 863. Project 863 was a program to catch up fast and surpass the West. It is considered one of the guiding, say, state-run policies for economic warfare and theft of intellectual property. Now, to step back a little bit further, everyone probably saw these 5 Chinese hackers who were indicted under the Obama administration. Those Chinese hackers were not just normal Chinese hackers. They've now moved this branch, they restructured it. It's now under the Strategic Support Force. But at the time, those 5 hackers were under Unit 61398, under the General Staff Department, 3rd Department. The General Staff Department is the war-fighting branch of the Chinese Communist Party. Why was the war-fighting branch of the Chinese Communist Party engaged in stealing intellectual property from American companies? Why was the war-fighting branch engaged in that? Keep in mind, Unit 61398 was one of 22 known operational bureaus. This was a very large operation. And the 3rd Department was the Signals Intelligence Department. Next to it was the 2nd Department, the Human Intelligence Department. And the 4th Department, the Electronics Intelligence Department. These departments work together. They also work in conjunction with many other departments within the Chinese Communist Party. Of course, this has been moved now into the Strategic Support Force. They restructured it to, I think, avoid criticism, right? Now, what did they do after Obama indicted them? Obama met with these, Chinese leaders. They agreed we will no longer steal intellectual property through, these means. What did they do? They used China Telecom and they diverted internet traffic to Chinese networks. In other words, American internet traffic was flowing through Chinese servers where they could steal it anyways. When you talk about companies like Huawei, ZTE, these ones, they say that no, we do not monitor data, we do not steal data. But under Chinese law, all data needs to be controllable and visible by the Chinese Communist Party. There is no such thing as data collected by Chinese companies that is not visible by the Chinese Communist Party. And so when we get into the bigger picture of what Huawei represents, it is a military tool of the Chinese Communist Party to expand its dominance around the world. And it's one that represents the export of the China model, an alternate system meant to challenge the American-led, international order, I guess we could call it. And it's one that represents totalitarianism, one that says you can do whatever you want to your citizens and we will not question you, we will allow it, we do not care. And on that note, too, one of the biggest questions with Huawei is when that woman is indicted to the United States, when the, say, charges are unsealed, who else is going to be exposed? Because when Chinese companies go abroad, this is how they operate. They'll get $10 million to make their deals, and $1 million of that is going to be for bribes. When you go into countries like Latin America, for example, and there's one stakeholder, one person who makes the call, and you say, I will give you $1 million to pass this deal, why should they care? And when you're dealing with big companies, that say that the person who makes the call, they don't really care about, they're going to retire in 5, 10 years anyways before anything comes and affects them. Get a big bribe, why not? And so China has created this system, and a lot of people could be exposed through this, Huawei indictment. We'll have to see what happens. But I think we should get more into the bigger picture. Now, Huawei is one part of many pieces of what the Chinese Communist Party is doing. Jan mentioned there are about 30-ish unconventional warfare tactics used by the Chinese Communist Party. And it's important to understand how this works. When the Chinese Communist Party say, we hear about things like cyber attacks, we hear about things like culture war with its takeover of Hollywood, we hear about things like fentanyl, things like, this drug crisis. These are part of the Chinese Communist Party's unrestricted warfare system. It is something they talk about publicly, and it's something that our media does not talk about or tell us about typically. And what is it? Now think about what is the goal of warfare. What would a country want to achieve in war? They have done that, and they said, how can we achieve those exact same goals without having to engage the United States in troop-on-troop combat? How do you obtain those exact same goals without having to engage in open warfare? And being a communist country that controls every single facet of Chinese society, they weaponized every single facet of Chinese society. And they are using that to wage war on the West. Now, to go over some of these tactics, there is non-military, trans-military, and unconventional military. Non-military could be things like culture warfare. How do you destroy the moral fabric of your enemy's societies? What is drug warfare, right? It is meant to corrupt the youth of a country, to gain control over the criminal networks of a country. Keep in mind that China is the largest supplier of precursor chemicals to the Mexican drug cartels. Keep in mind that they are the main source of all these synthetic drugs making their way into the United States. A great book on this is Red Cocaine by Joseph Douglas. He talks about the whole history of drug warfare and how it started under the Soviet Union, under Cuba, and under the Chinese Communist Party. Mao Zedong talked about revolutionary opium, how to weaponize drugs, and how to use these. That was Red Cocaine, I saw some people writing, by Joseph Douglas. If you get into cyber warfare, you get into economic warfare, it's how do you control the GDP of a country? You get into business warfare, how do you control the say, death by 1,000 cuts approach? How do you steal from them what they produce? And what is one of the main goals of communism? Seize the means of production. And what are the means of production? That's the factories. That's the natural resources. And what is China doing when it goes abroad? It is going to countries like Australia, it is going to countries in Latin America, and it is buying up the GDP products of those countries. They control the iron mines and things like this. They control the timber, whatever, anything they can find that will give them control over that country, they buy control of. And so this is a very small picture of what's taking place right now. And I think when you get into the unconventional war for, say, open warfare, that's when you get into the future of where things could be heading. And Jan mentioned that Bannon's commented that Huawei is more of a threat than even nuclear weapons. And why is that? You're dealing with a country that, we're dealing with a future, I should say, where weapons are being developed on a terrifying extent. You're talking about things like AI, you're talking about things like biometrics, you're talking about things like... Okay, we got to take questions soon. Right? Yeah, long story short, where we are at there is a battle in the world, I would say. I think in the West we see it in this struggle between freedom and socialism. This idea that we could lose our freedoms, that the nature of the life we know could change. We've seen the effects of this, and we know that this is under attack yet again. When it comes to the international order, it is a struggle between the China model and the American model. And Huawei, of course, represents a key facet in that.